few weeks ago, I reviewed the cracked Nitro deck. Its slot-in design looked really nice on my Switch OLED. Cracked pretty much nailed the aesthetics of the form factor. But as I kept using it after that video, I felt its compromises to design more and more until I kinda hated using it. It always sucks to spend $60 on a controller only to have it not feel great to use, especially since I really like the idea of having something a bit more comfortable for handheld play than using Joy-Cons. In the interest of trying something simple that I knew would likely be solid, I opted for these Hori split pads as my replacement. And honestly, I think I made the right choice. Now, before I get into what makes these better than the Nitro deck, for me at least, let's first go over some key missing features. For starters, these are essentially wired controllers. There's no onboard battery. Detaching them from the Switch will power them off. That also means that the home button doesn't wake the Switch because it needs to receive power from the system to send commands. It's also missing a host of other features as well, like amiibo support, motion controls, and rumble. Amiibo support seems to be a rare feature among many controllers these days, but I think a lack of motion and rumble might be harder to accept for a lot of people. Although, in all honesty, the number of games in which I use motion controls in handheld mode, basically Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Rumble also tends to be so lackluster on many third-party controllers that not having it doesn't feel as big a loss at this point as I might have expected. Plus, given that these are easy to slide on and off and my Joy-Cons are rarely too far away, it's not as if I still don't have other options. But hey, I digress. I'm starting with these negatives because if any of these features are must-haves for you, the split pad obviously won't be a good option. But beyond the missing features is actually a surprisingly solid, comfortable controller that feels focused in its design. Each half of the controller is about 50% wider than a typical Joy-Con, but twice as thick. The entirety of the shell and buttons are covered in this very soft plastic that feels great against my hands. Combined with the noticeable texturing on the protruding grips, these gamepads are leagues more comfortable than any Joy-Cons without significantly increasing the overall size of the Switch. I'd love if Nintendo actually copied some of these material and size choices for a future Joy-Con iteration. I feel the same way about the overall button layout too. At its core, it uses a standard Switch layout with a couple extra grip buttons and toggles for both remapping those grips and turbo. But it also takes some important cues from larger controllers by collapsing the D-pad into a single unit, shifting each thumbstick slightly to the left, and making the sticks full-sized with nicely textured rubberized stick caps. The end result is a Joy-Con substitute whose buttons feel much more comfortable to reach. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say that such a compact layout is quite as comfortable to use as a full-size controller, but after many hours spent replaying Pokemon Shield, I felt no desire to swap my Joy-Cons or Nitro deck back in. For handheld play, I think these might be my go-to controllers from now on. Comfort's not the entirety of my decision-making process though. The buttons also feel ridiculously solid. Each of the face buttons, shoulders, and digital triggers require just the right amount of pressure to get started, with a satisfyingly tactile, purposeful actuation point. I'd liken them to a Pro controller if its buttons also had an extra soft coating and were a tad bit springier. I dig it. Likewise, the split pad's thumbsticks have a very similar amount of resistance to them as the ones on the Pro controller. The main difference here are those slightly concave textured rubber stick caps. The extra grip they provide is subtle, but feel much better than the smooth, rounded caps that the Pro controller uses. They're squarely in that zone of thumbsticks that feel just right without being mind-blowing, which is honestly what I kinda want most of the time. Whether working my way through newer Mario Kart 8 tracks or saving Waddle Dees in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, they felt plenty responsive and just as comfortable to use as the rest of the controller. If there's one portion of the controller's input options I have mixed feelings about, it's actually the D-pad. If I had to describe it in one word, it'd be fine. It's okay. It technically gets the job done, but, well, each input feels purposeful with no unintentional inputs to note. The shape of the D-pad is also quite good, with each cardinal direction being slightly raised, making it easy for my thumb to land on with confidence on a specific button. But the main issue is that it doesn't feel great to actually press. Compared to the action buttons, there's about half as much travel and much firmer actuation. During a few runs of Shovel Knight Dig, it felt like I was constantly putting in much more effort to move around than I would need with D-pads on other controllers. For longer sessions playing games that depend heavily on the D-pad for movement, I have a feeling my thumbs are liable to feel really sore before long. It's definitely not a deal breaker for me though, considering how well Hori did with just about everything else here. Rather, it just lets me know how I probably shouldn't use this controller, and why you might avoid this controller for certain applications. Nevertheless, the SplitPad feels like the perfect example of a company severely limiting the features of its controller to really nail the core user experience. In many ways, it feels like someone cutting a Pro controller in half, sticking some Joy-Con rails onto each of the halves, and saying, here you go. Which is honestly a compliment to them for a controller that's so compact. For many games, it feels so much more comfortable than Joy-Cons that I mostly forget the number of missing features. Now, that doesn't mean that all the concessions Hori made are equally good here. If there's one thing that really bothers me the most about these controllers, it's actually the lack of onboard battery. For typical handheld usage, it's not too big of a problem. However, if I want to travel with the SplitPad, I'll likely need to pack a pair of Joy-Cons if I have any desire to dock my Switch or play in tabletop mode and don't want to bring another full-size controller. If the SplitPad had batteries, I could detach them whenever and skip those extra Joy-Cons altogether. Plus, the size of the pad detached feels a lot better in my hands than Joy-Cons. I'm betting it'd be more comfortable to play with them overall that way. It all just kind of feels like a missed opportunity. Hori does technically have a workaround for this with their attachment set, which includes a wired adapter to allow folks to use the controller with the Switch docked. However, that also costs $30 more than the base price of the SplitPad Compact and isn't sold separately by itself. If you're interested in that adapter, you have to buy it with the SplitPad up front, or shell out an extra $80 for a second controller later on. Which, honestly, isn't great. I already found the $50 price tag of the SplitPad Compact by itself a bit much for what it actually offers. Considering all the missing features, I think $30 to $40 is probably a more appropriate price. But, honestly, I think that might be me being a little bit nitpicky here, especially since I've seen it on sale occasionally for a bit less than their base price, and it's at least very well built. Still, for anyone looking for a basic, no-frills Switch controller for handheld play that does exactly what it says it'll do on the box, the Hori SplitPad Compact is a pretty excellent controller. Even if it's not quite as travel-friendly as a pair of Joy-Cons and has a D-pad that's less than stellar, it gets so much right regarding the look and feel of a proper Joy-Con substitute that I'm going to leave these attached to my Switch for quite some time. Of course, those are my thoughts. Now, I'd like to know yours. Are you looking for a comfortable Joy-Con substitute and think these might be up your alley? Alternatively, did you already buy these controllers and have thoughts of your own you'd like to share with me and the other people watching this video? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. I'll have links to every controller and attachment thing I mentioned in this video down in the description in case you're interested in any of it. I'll also include a couple other links to the SplitPad Pro controller, which is essentially the same controller but beefier and with some stems included to round out the grip. My choice to go with the Compact over the Pro was purely aesthetic, but I figured I'd mention that there's a slightly more substantial option with the same exact trade-offs for folks who'd like something a bit bulkier. As always, if you found this video helpful or informative, go ahead and give it a like, and then get subscribed for more controller reviews in the future. If you'd like to see how I felt about a much different Joy-Con substitute, go check out my review from earlier this year on the Nixie Wizard. I actually still use those controllers on occasion, although the button arrangement makes them a bit less ideal for certain games. But yeah, anyway, that's going to be all for this video. Thanks y'all for watching. Until next time, catch you later.